When you get really clear on what your goals are, you can strategically build your next step. You strategically know where you need to go and how much money and how much income you need to generate in order to create the life you want.
Welcome to Divorce Dialogues. I'm Katherine Miller. This is where we have honest, thoughtful conversations about divorce, the emotional, financial, legal, and family questions no one prepares you for. From deciding whether to separate, to navigating the process with dignity, to rebuilding what comes next, Divorce Dialogues is here to help you find clarity, perspective, and a better way forward. I'm really pleased to welcome to Divorce Dialogues Julia Shteynberg. She's a financial and money mindset coach who helps high-earning women build confidence, clarity, and long-term wealth. With a background as a senior corporate professional, she blends practical strategy with deep mindset work to create lasting financial freedom. Welcome, Julia, to the show.
Thank you so much, Katherine. I'm so excited to be here.
So I know that you do a lot of mindset work, and I think that's really interesting around the issue of money. But just right off the bat, if someone is lying awake at night, and lots of people do, worrying about money and divorce, because of course, divorce creates a lot of money concerns, what's the very first step that they should take to feel maybe a little bit more in control?
I think that's a great question. And I think this relates to not just divorce, but any kind of time that you're going through any type of transition or even kind of feeling any type of anxiety around money. I think the first thing that you really need to get a good hold on is where you stand financially, but like specifically what your cash flow looks like. What does it look like coming in? What does it look like going out? Like really get an understanding of what your lifestyle is costing you, because that's really the piece that keeps people kind of in fear and in uncertainty and in avoidance, because it's just like they just have no idea what their lifestyle is costing them and where their money is going. So I would say that would be the first thing, especially when you're heading into something that's, so uprooting as like divorce and any kind of other transition. You want to be able to get some kind of grounding, get some kind of certainty when you're in an uncertain space. And that will really, really help you.
I can imagine somebody who really hasn't been aware of the cash flow. And I love that you called it cash flow, because a lot of times we use the word budget. I only hate the word budget because it sounds like diet, right? It sounds like, oh, I can't spend as much. I can't eat as much. I have to reduce. But really what we're looking at is measuring. The first thing that we need to do is measure the cost of lifestyle. Because in my opinion, Julia, and let me know if you agree or disagree with this, that you can make choices about holding on to what's most important to you when you know what everything costs, but you can't otherwise. And that creates anxiety. What do you think?
Absolutely. I completely agree with you. And that's what we call also like aligning your money with your values, because it is about making intentional choices, things that are important to you versus being able to make trade-offs, right? And I agree, like nobody likes the word budget, which I find really interesting because it's so practical and it's so simple, but I've actually moved away from that too because of that kind of negative connotation that comes with it that feels like restriction, which I would like to argue that you can choose how you think about that word and you can choose to give it another meaning, but maybe that's for another version or another podcast. But yes,
I totally agree. I mean, I was really very deep into the law firm business before I understood that budget meant a spending plan. And then comparing the spending plan against what was actually happening and making adjustments. To me, it just felt like being on a diet. Bad.
I hear that. And money and food and diet is actually, I mean, there's a lot of similarities around the mindset around those two things. So that makes total sense to me. Yeah.
A lot of people, I think, feel embarrassed and ashamed that they don't know about the money in their house. And I think that really applies more to women than to men. I think it's more likely to have happened, at least at this moment in time. If someone is listening and they feel embarrassed or ashamed that they don't understand the household finances, what do you think they can do to start getting some clarity and minimizing? I'm not going to say without being ashamed, but at least addressing that sense of shame.
Well, I think what you said, the key point there is addressing the shame, right? Because I think typically what happens is when people feel ashamed, they start avoiding, right? Because you don't want to deal with it. So I think the first step needs to be just recognition of the fact that you're not comfortable, that there are things that you don't know. When you start kind of like putting almost like a description on it, you can separate yourself as an identity, right? Like, I'm not good with money. I don't understand money. You separate yourself and it creates a bit of space. So it's not like you as an identity, it's just that you haven't quite yet learned this skill set. I recognize it's easier said than done because these can be very deep and this can be generational and kind of habits and things that you pick up from your family. But it is possible to kind of like separate yourself from that and to just acknowledge, like, hey, I don't know. It doesn't make me feel very good. And that's okay. Because it's like the first step is really to acknowledge the feeling and then process it and then be able to move on. But really just kind of like recognizing and owning it and accepting it, I would say, is that first step before even kind of starting with that next section of like learning to understand your cash flow and all that kind of stuff. Just owning and acknowledging the feeling first, which I think people don't
Yeah.
want to do.
Julia, I think it's also somewhat relational sometimes, and that's not always the case, but sometimes if one partner leaves that to the other and then feels ashamed about it, sometimes there's some anger about that. And I find this is a dynamic all the time where in a traditional type marriage, the wife might think, well, my husband never shared with me the financial information. And the husband's like, what are you talking about? Quarterly, we sat down, we went over our finances, and she's still pretty sure that they didn't ever talk about that. And have you ever come across something like that?
Yeah, I come across that a lot. I think it's a pretty natural dynamic. There's typical kind of like two sides, right? Like one does more of the management, one doesn't. But I think the difference is everybody kind of has their roles, right? In any relationship. And it's okay if somebody wants to take something else, like take the finances on. But the thing that I kind of caution with is to just for the other person to completely outsource that entire kind of like function and outsource it from their mind, outsource it from their kind of thoughts. Like, I don't have to worry about it, right? And maybe you don't have to worry about it, and that's great. But to have a responsibility and an ownership in discussing it, in asking questions, and kind of taking ownership over your own knowledge is really all it is, right? Like being active in your own knowledge and like learning of that. So I do see that. To get like a little bit personal, my husband and I, when we first started being together, that was kind of the dynamic, but in reverse. Like, I was more of the money managing our finances and he wasn't super involved. But we got to a point where it's my responsibility to be like, hey, babe, I want you involved. And it's his responsibility. And it doesn't mean he has to do anything. It's more just like you have to know. You have to know what's happening, how much your household costs you, right? And then it's his responsibility to kind of like to receive that and actively participate and take ownership and accountability and responsibility. So it's two-way, like any relationship.
Yeah. And I think that oftentimes the relationship around money reflects other things that are happening in the relationship. So sometimes people say, well, money is the reason why lots of people get divorced. And I guess that's true, but I think it's the symptom. It shows the symptom of a deeper communication problem in the relationship. That's just my
100%.
opinion.
I completely agree with you because money is like, it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable for people to think about it for themselves. And then when you get into a relationship, it's another layer of complexity and another thing that you have to communicate on and align on, like any other goal. It's like, do you want kids? Do you not want kids? It's kind of the same thing. You've got to align and communicate around that. And it's not about just one time, it's ongoing. It's constant because every new situation in life can uncover a new belief or a new money story or a new value, and you constantly have to come together. So you're right, like money could be one of the symptoms, but the bigger I feel like issue is the communication.
That's true. I'm just sort of thinking about it. I wonder if you have an opinion about this. I think that people feel controlled maybe about the money, particularly if they don't earn the same amount. It seems like it makes sense for each person in the couple to have a budgetary item, a line item in their spending plan that is like just for whatever the heck they want it to spend for, and that they don't have to account for that. You get X dollars to spend on whatever you want, and we're not going to talk about what that is.
I
Yeah.
think that's a great idea. I think every couple has to develop their own way of doing it. And I think that's a great way to be able for everybody to feel like they have control and responsibility and ownership in the financial part of marriage, right? Like even if one person is the one that's making the money, I do see this a lot where it's like women feel like because they're not financially contributing to the household, they don't feel like they deserve either that, or there's a bit of like an identity and kind of like a deserving thing there. But like any relationship, you're doing things together, one supports another. And I think in order for each party to feel like, again, they kind of have ownership over their own decisions and ownership over being able to manage their own cash flow, that is probably a safe way to move forward.
So if somebody's about to separate and they've never managed the money on their own, what do you think is the thing that they should start to gather or review the financial thing just right now, first thing?
I would review kind of like what I said before, your cash flow. So know how much money is coming in from kind of whatever sources, and then also know how much the life that you are living is costing you. Everything, the Amazon orders, the groceries, things that people don't even kind of think about, like the everyday things. Do you have any subscriptions? What is Netflix costing you? Really understand what your lifestyles and where the money is going, because the next step is when you're setting yourself up in your new life post transition, you want to be able to intentionally create a life with money that is aligned to your values, because it's very easy to be unintentional. And that's where things can get really muddled and tangled when you're not being intentional with where your money goes. So the first step is understanding what all of this actually costs you.
Divorce Dialogues is brought to you by Miller Law Group. We believe divorce isn't just a legal process, it's a human transition. At Miller Law Group, we help people navigate divorce with dignity, clarity, and respect, focusing on conversations that lead to better outcomes for families. Learn more at miller-law.com. And I think it's really important for separating and divorcing people to understand that the first step is to measure the lifestyle as it is now, not what you think it's going to be. And don't start thinking, well, I could do that for less. I could spend less on this. I could spend less on that. Or I really need to spend more on that. You should just measure what it is. Close enough, right? It does not have to be down to the penny. If this year was different than last year, average the two. It's not that important that you get the exact dollars and cents amount, but that you get a sort of sense of what it is you're spending on. And the reason that is, and Julia, I'm interested to hear what you think about this, is that way you're going to be able to make choices as to what's important later on. I had a couple of mediation, and for longtime listeners to the podcast will have heard this story before, but they were just making it living together and really worried about how they were going to cover the cost of living separately. And I made them do a very detailed cash flow analysis. And I remember the husband came back in and he goes, I'm just going to bring my coffee from home and I'm going to save that money and be able to apply that toward a different lifestyle. So I think it's that kind of example that really gives you the power to make that kind of choices. What do you think in your world?
Absolutely, absolutely. You can't make any progress on something if you don't measure it. It's like a business. How do you know if your business is profitable if you don't have any type of measurement in place? Like, how do you know if your business is making money? How do you know what your business is costing you, right? I think this is a really, really important piece. It's measurement without emotional attachment. It's measurement without judgment, and it's measurement without putting any kind of meaning or story on it. And I think that is the place where people get really tripped up and really uncomfortable and avoid, because right away, there is an inevitable connection between money and emotion. So right away, whatever is happening, usually people will put some kind of story on that. It means this, it means this, it means this. And it's like, we have to be able to do it without the emotional component of it.
Or at least postpone it, because we get that all the time. We send someone off to do their cash flow analysis and they come back in and they apologize for how much money they're spending on clothes or on beauty or something like that. This is not something that I'm in the business of judging. Oh my gosh, I can't believe you're spending that much money on clothes. Like, no, this is just what it is. And from here, we're going to have some choices as to how you want to move forward.
Well, and I think it's an important piece to know too, like it is what it is. And I think that will show you kind of what is important to you and where are your values, and maybe start helping you shape what the next stage will look like. I never shame anybody that comes to me that like they spend money on their, appearance or things or clothes. I mean, like, I love all of that. There is a time and a place for everything. Your outside and your inside have to align. And I think that's a very important part of identity and confidence and all of that. But you're right, like it's got to be understood and measured and intentional.
Yeah, intentional. I
Yeah.
think that's a really, really terrific word. How do you handle the fear when someone wonders, will I be okay financially on my own?
Yeah, I think that's a really good one. The thing with that question is you're almost like outsourcing it, right? When you're asking that question, even like to yourself, will I be okay on my own? Versus deciding with certainty, I will be okay. And there is a different feeling that each of those things give you. Because when you think about it, will I be okay? Like right away, when I think, will I be okay? I'm like, oh my God, I don't know. Because then you're like, what about this? And what about this? And it's so big. Will I be okay? Right? Versus the thing that you say to yourself, because both things are thoughts, and you get to decide what you think and what you say to yourself. So versus saying, I will be okay. Like, right, when you say that, think about that energy that you feel in your body, that certainty and that strength. And maybe it'll take a few times because you may not believe it, right? But like initially, the switch that I would say is instead of asking yourself, will I be okay? You tell yourself, I will be okay. Because that creates grounding, that creates some level of certainty in a situation where transition, where there's so much uncertainty, right? So I think that is like an important distinction.
I do too, but and as I'm listening to you, Julia, I'm thinking, what if you ask the question, what will it take for me to be okay? Instead of
Ah,
will I be okay? Because
yes.
this is a negotiation, and there are things in the divorce negotiation that are going to be negotiated between the two people. And then there are decisions that each person is going to make about their own financial situation, their own earnings, their own spending, their own investments, and how they're going to do that. And that is a proactive and not a reactive. Sometimes people say to me, and by sometimes I mean fairly frequently, well, should I wait to get a job until after the negotiations are over so I can maximize the amount of maintenance or alimony that I'm going to get from the other person? And my answer is always no. That's cutting
Right.
off your nose to spite your face, because that is shooting yourself in the financial foot long term and overall wealth building to do something like that in order to try to extract something from the other side. And it doesn't work.
I agree with you. I actually did a podcast on this, or I was doing something around this exact same thing around the kind of emotional component of like what my kind of payout or distribution will be before I get a job or whatever. And it's just like, well, no, because you're thinking about it. Like, I don't want to say wrong, but the thoughts are, you want to be strategic around what is it going to take for you to be okay. And exactly kind of what you said, like, don't cut off your nose to spite your face. And again, what that does is leaving it to somebody else versus taking ownership and control over your own destiny, right? You can say, what will it take? And then ask for the distribution or kind of negotiation, the pieces that you want. But you also have to recognize what you do have control over and what you don't have control over. You can ask for it, you can, and you should, but you may or may not get it. But you do have control over knowing what it's going to cost you to achieve like the life and like the wealth that you want, right? And taking ownership and getting the job, and then also taking ownership and being like, yes, I will be okay. Like all that stuff is within your control versus the open-ended question of, will I be okay? And almost kind of like putting that in somebody else's hands.
Totally. Well, for someone who sacrificed career growth during the marriage, what would you say to them about how they could realistically thinking about rebuilding their income?
I think it's really important. I think that in these types of situations, there is an inevitability of identity loss and identity confusion. And I think usually with identity confusion and loss and not being in an income generating role during marriage or any relationship, I think there's always like a self-confidence kind of thing that people first need to kind of break through and get comfortable with, right? So I think that's really the first stage in wealth building is your self identity, the concept of your identity and kind of who you are and who you want to be. I think it's a scary place to be, the transition post divorce. It's also like, it could be really magical and you get to really rebuild yourself and rebuild who you are and who you want to be. So I think the self identity component comes first in all of that. And that's a lot of mindset coaching and your own coaching and journaling and, kind of getting support from whatever sources make sense.
I mean, a lot of people who've been stay-at-home parents think, well, I'm 45, I'm 52, I've been out of the workforce 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. Who's going to want to hire me? But, Julia, I had a client a few years ago who took all the skills that she had developed during her stay-at-home,
Yeah.
organizing the kids' schedule, setting them up, managing the finances of the family. And she put them on her resume as skills. And she got a job making six figures because she
Amazing.
presented herself so well and was able to reframe those skills in a
Yeah.
way that looked attractive to the marketplace.
Absolutely. Look, you're an SVP of operations of your household because that's a lot of different components. That's logistics, that's catering, that's a lot of different components. So I completely get that. And we're in a little bit of a different world now in terms of like AI. And if somebody that kind of doesn't know, I mean, like Chat GPT, Claude, like use that to your advantage. And if you don't know how to kind of turn that into something that's marketable, you have tools to be able to do that. There's YouTube tutorials, like arm yourself, right?
So after the divorce is finalized, what do you think the top three financial priorities should be for someone in that first 90 days period?
It's a great question. So I keep going back to knowing your cash flow, assuming you know kind of what the lifestyle is costing you. I would say it's really, really important to figure out where you want to go. So let's just assume that you already kind of know where you are, right? Typically, what happens is because you don't have a destination, you just kind of make choices that are maybe kind of driven from external resources as a reaction, kind of what you said before. But when you get really clear on what your goals are, you can strategically build your next step. You strategically know where you need to go and how much money and how much income you need to generate in order to create the life you want. So this is a really, really big one, is kind of like setting your goals, get clear on your intention, and then figuring out those steps, at least step number one in order to get there. I would start with getting clear on your goals, only because that is something that people come to me for. And that takes some time, like to kind of really figure out you're coming out of this and you're identifying kind of who you are and what you want to be. That's a big goal. So maybe take that goal and break it up into maybe kind of like smaller components and give yourself some time to really absorb and figure that out.
How can listeners shift from the survival mode to thinking about actually building wealth post divorce?
So survival mode is a little bit kind of like what we talked about before, right? Am I going to be okay? Or like switching more into certainty. Survival mode, it really generates based in fear and it's based in uncertainty. So in order to get out of survival mode, you need to create certainty for yourself. And then in a world that is uncertain, you need to kind of what we talked about before. Yes, I will be okay. So where can you create certainty? Maybe you don't have certainty in kind of what your goals are, but it's important for you to start recognizing where is there certainty and where can you create certainty. And I think that is the best way to get immediately out of survival mode. Because survival mode also, you're making decisions from a place of emotion because it's primal, right?
I would
But
say not so much emotion, but reactivity. You're in a place of reactivity and fear because I think you're going to make any decisions from a place of emotion. It's just whether or not how you frame it.
you can have emotion, you can have like fear-based action, or you can have positive-based emotion. And the reason I say like take emotion out, because usually, yes, decisions are made from like when we talk about emotional spending and all that stuff, it's usually like negative emotion. So I totally agree with you. Try to get out of the reactive. And in order to get out of the reactive is to give yourself that level of certainty so that you can think strategically, you can think logically versus thinking and acting from fear.
All right. Well, Julia, what is one piece of financial advice that you wish everyone going through divorce would actually follow, but they almost never do?
I would say give yourself space and grace for potential financial missteps, because I think that if you don't, you're just kind of piling it on yourself and making it harder for yourself to be able to move forward from a place without shame, without fear, without all of that stuff. So I think the first step is kindness to yourself and recognizing that it's new, potentially. Like everything that you're doing is new and it's kind of on your own, and you're not going to know everything. And it's okay if things don't go according to plan.
That's great. All right, one more question
Yeah.
because we're almost out of time. What's the mindset shift or the reframe that helps someone move from scarcity to strategy during divorce?
The mindset shift is, we talked a lot about certainty because I think that's a big one. I keep kind of going back to that. But I also think the other piece of it is intention, not outsourcing these decisions and kind of looking within yourself to create something intentional, create intentional goals, create an intentional path for yourself. And I think when you have an intention, you're working towards something, versus I think scarcity is also in this place of reaction. Being intentional with what you want to create for this next phase in your life, I think is a really important thing to get you out of that mode.
Great. Julia Shteynberg, if people want to get in touch with you or find out more about you, how can they do that?
You can email me, julia@moneycoachjulia.com. And then I also have a newsletter that I send out weekly that would give you access to additional kind of money mindset strategies and topics. But best way is email. So julia@moneycoachjulia.com. Really simple.
Great. Well, thank you so much for being my guest on Divorce Dialogues.
Thank you. This was so great. I appreciate your time.
If this conversation was helpful, share it with someone who might need it. And if you're navigating divorce yourself, you'll find more resources and episodes at miller-law.com. Make sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.